I've just watched a report from Vice News in Portland, Oregon, which of course has become the sort of epicenter, so to speak, of America's culture wars. Now, ever since that raucous presidential debate between Biden and Trump, um, there's been increased debate and scrutiny of the Proud Boys. And this is my take from what I gather. I don't think they're explicitly racist, and it's significant that they have minority members, black and Hispanic members and spokespeople. So I don't think they're an explicitly white supremacist organization. But that doesn't mean that they're harmless or moderate. They're far from it. From what I gather, the Proud Boys are a sort of cult-like fraternity. I certainly don't get a good vibe from them. Um, if they were merely a rebuke to woke intolerance or the antics of the far left, that might be one thing. But if you actually look at their background, take for example their Tsar initiation rites. Now, that might work in college campuses, but when it's sort of involved in a movement that is pretty influential, it raises questions. I think it's cult-like. Apparently, for example, their members have to recite the names of cereals while being beaten by other members. All male, which is it's not unheard of. You get that to some extent within Freemasonry. Um, they've been called misogynistic. I don't know enough about that to say if that's true or not, but certainly the views on women could probably be described as quite old-fashioned and conservative, very conservative. One of my biggest issues with the Proud Boys is their militia type imagery. They're real Second Amendment zealots. So, they're very much about the right to bear arms, which in the American Constitution is a right, but I immediately look at that. I think, yeah, Timothy McVeigh. I am very, very wary of blowhard gun nuts. Um, so, it's a contradiction to say you're peaceful and then you're bringing firearms to an event. That's not a peaceful act. It's just a contradiction. Even if you don't intend to use them, then the intention is to intimidate. That's my take on the Proud Boys. I don't trust them, and I would say that just because they're not explicitly racist doesn't mean they're okay. Already, some right wingers who should know better, some moderate conservatives are trying to downplay them. Although I should say many Republicans were not overly impressed by Trump's performance, and this is in keeping with the president. To sort of claim he doesn't know people. It's pathetic, actually. But then there's the other extreme. Antifa and BLM particularly. Let me just say for the record, I cannot stand Antifa. I think that they are thugs, and I think that they epitomize the very intolerance that they claim to be against. You see, the narrative of Antifa, and we get them here in the UK as well, and in other parts of Europe, so it's not something that's totally alien to our society. They believe that simply hiding behind the label of anti-fascism makes them good people. But if you look at their behavior, they're cards because they don't show their faces. Okay, say what you want about the Proud Boys, but at least they show their faces, and I'm no fan of them. Okay, I think they could be thugs as well, but I do think there is something in not showing your face. If you really have conviction, then you shouldn't have a problem showing your face. So that's one of my major questions about Antifa. Why do they not show their face? They believe it's legitimate to use violence against their political opponents. I don't think you win points by hitting a fascist. You win the argument by demonstrating how their extreme right wing views, are wrong. You don't win points just by punching someone that you don't agree with. So Antifa, despite their claims, they are violent. What I really despise about Antifa is they've held signs saying things like, if you're not Antifa, then you're a fascist. So if you don't support them, then you're a fascist. That would be me and millions of other people. But they're a violent organization, and it isn't just that they oppose the far right. They're anarchists. They have a problem with a lot of aspects of Western civilization. So you need to dig beneath the surface. I think a lot of otherwise informed people seem to think that they're harmless because they call themselves Antifa. That is extremely naive. Imagine Nawaz recently pointed out that a lot of people that, in fact, the brown shirts and the Third Reich started off as quite far left in the early 20s. They were anti-establishment. There was a lot that was definitely not what later became known as far right about them, but they gradually went down the line of course, ultranationalism and so on. I personally think that there is very little difference between the far right and the far left. I think you can find a lot of similarities in terms of their perceived opposition to the establishment, in terms of their potential for violence, in terms of the way they both want to stifle free speech. They claim that they're about free speech, but actually they want to stifle it. Now, the Proud Boys say they support free speech. Um, probably probably the record on that is better than Antifa, but I honestly think this is a very dangerous situation. I mean, these guys talk about being proud Western chauvinists. If they were simply saying, look, let's not have this apology situation where the West is always blamed for the world ills, I agree with that, but it's not exactly good politics to say that you're a proud Western chauvinist. So these guys don't care about the optics. Um, and they seem to want to fight. So do Antifa. As for Black Lives Matter, as far as I'm concerned, they lost credibility long ago. You know, there might be individuals in Black Lives Matter that are there for honest intentions because they have a problem with police brutality and they genuinely believe there's systemic or structural racism. But BLM as an organization, as a movement, I'm not talking about the concept, as a movement, I have a big problem with it. I do think it's racist. And I would say to BLM supporters, if it's not racist, then why do you not denounce the racism within? Simple, really. If you cannot bring yourself to denounce someone like Yusuf Kigali, who has vilified all white people, then don't tell me that BLM isn't racist because it is. I strongly believe that if you associate yourself with a movement, you need to be prepared to confront the extremes within that movement. And if you can't do that, then you've no right to complain. BLM claim they're peaceful. They're not. Wherever there have been BLM rallies, yes, there have been some peaceful protests, but more often than not, there has also been looting and rioting. And I don't think it's enough to say, oh, well, it's just some opportunists take advantage of this, because it always happens where BLM have a presence. So I don't think you could just say, oh, it's just some opportunists or it's just some anarchists. Okay, maybe not every individual BLM activist supports rioting and looting, but many turn a blind eye to it. And I think it's disgusting that people try to downplay looting and vandalism as if they're somehow trivial things, as if burning someone from their home or destroying someone's business is a small thing. That can, that can ruin lives. And this year's unrest, over 30 people have died. So another problem I have with BLM is they talk about police brutality, but they're pretty much silent when white people are killed by the police. So what's the difference? They also push this narrative that every single time a black suspect is apprehended, it must be racism. That's extremely dangerous because it basically mitigates black criminality. It basically lets black criminals off the hook. Black Lives Matter never condemn black gangs. Never. I think that's a disgrace. So you have all these factions, the Proud Boys, and there's other right wing groups, Black Lives Matter, Antifa. They're all itching for a fight. They love it. They want a fight. And both campaigns, both Donald Trump and to some extent Biden and Harris, have fueled this. Now, Biden and the Harris have Biden in the debate and in other moments when this has been brought up, he has condemned rioting and looting. He said there's no excuse for that. But I still think that the Democrats need to distance themselves from Black Lives Matter. It started off as a vocal point, and probably there is internal party politics going on with this, where Black Lives Matter has an influence on a large part of the Democrats' voting base. But they need to be responsible and they need to say, we cannot be too close to an organization that won't denounce racism in their midst. But then the media has also got a role in this. You know, the likes of Don Lemon on CNN, they never condemn black racism. I have no problem with them condemning the likes of the Proud Boys, but I do have a problem with someone like Don Lemon refusing to recognise the racism within Black Lives Matter. And I talk about Don Lemon because he's one of the loudest voices on CNN on race issues, and yet he does not acknowledge extremes within Black Lives Matter. I have never seen Don Lemon condemn black racists, not once. Doesn't mean he is a racist himself, but it means he's not consistent. That's a big problem. I think these big media networks have a lot to answer for, but we're even seeing this starting to develop, within the media because there's something now called One American News, which is basically kind of the official mouthpiece for the Trump administration. I mean, they ask questions totally uncritically. It's kind of like what you get in communist states, where the media, like in China, CGTN, they just ask scripted questions to the ruling party. One American News is basically Trump's state mouthpiece. You know, if Trump was a dictator, they would be his state mouthpiece. They won't ask critical questions. So if CNN's biased, then One American News is the other extreme. So I'm very concerned. My sympathy lies with American moderates. And I would say to all Americans of good intent, whether you're Republican or Democrat, I say this because similar things are happening in my country, maybe to a smaller extent, but they are happening here. And I would say moderate Americans really, really need to speak up. So I say to moderate right wingers, condemn the extremes in your midst, condemn the Proud Boys, condemn other ultranationals. And to be fair, they do. Uh, but I also say to moderate left wingers, there's also an onus on you to condemn Antifa and, frankly, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is not a moderate organization. There may be individuals in it who are okay and who are there with good intentions, but I really think that there is serious problems within this organization, within this movement, and CNN won't do their job. I think their handling of racial issues, for the most part, is a disgrace. I have no problem with their critique of President Trump, because I share a lot of that critique, but their handling of race issues is 100% biased. That doesn't help. It fuels the culture wars. CNN never condemned black racism, ever, and I think that's a disgrace. But if you support Black Lives Matter, simple question for you. Do you condemn Yusra Kogali? She's the Toronto co-founder of Black Lives Matter. She has dehumanized white people, all white people, okay? Not just white racists, all white people. Um, so condemn her or don't complain. Simple as that. This applies to the UK as well. Keir Starmer, he took the knee, which was a ridiculous act of posturing. He should have known better. He needs to distance himself from Black Lives Matter. He recently said that the Labour Party shouldn't be afraid of patriotism. So I think he's putting some of the right notes out there, but I think he needs to distance himself from Black Lives Matter. Um, but Portland is really exemplary of what's going on right now, and it could get worse. I think if Trump's re-elected, one of the Proud Boys that was interviewed actually admitted that, and it's like he was almost happy about the fact that there could be a civil war. I personally think that's an exaggeration. I don't think we're going to see a situation where, the United States has 330 million people. So we have to not, although it's a serious situation right now, I don't think it will be that bad. I think most people will just want to get on with their lives. However, you get these two factions, the far right and the far left, they keep wanting to push it. They want to confront one another. And it's dangerous. I see both sides as problematic. I don't think either side is reasonable. Um, Concerns me. We see similar things here. Um, but if you can't bring yourself to recognize the extremes, then you're not really helping the situation. I just think that this is a time when American moderates really need to let their voices be heard.